Good morning if you're in Britain or Western Europe. Good afternoon if you're in the Middle East or South Asia. Good evening if you're in Singapore, or good night, very late good evening, and the same in Australia. So we have just a second. Right. So this is a conference on restructuring of the global economy. And therefore, my first keynote is a link, I do beg your pardon, between just a second. Just up a bit. Oh, there we go. Hooray. So we have three specifically maritime items for you this morning. First of all, Peter Cook on crime and security in this maritime century. We then have David Graves, who's going to talk about maritime crime in the Gulf of Guinea, which has taken over from Somalia as the main hotspot for piracy, although it's a different kind of piracy. And Dr. Simon Allison from Queen's College, Cambridge, the use of force by non-state actors on the high seas, public and private responses. As a prelude to those, and as a link or a bridge between the overall aim of the conference, which is restructuring of the global economy, and the maritime, specifically maritime items below, I'm going to talk about the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on China's Belt and Road Initiative. So I think that forms a bridge between the wider conference program and the specifically maritime foci to follow. The biographies are in the conference program, so I'll ask the other speakers to briefly introduce themselves when the time comes. You're probably all familiar with the Belt and Road Initiative, which was announced in 2013. It was originally called One Belt, One Road, but they changed the name, or the name was changed a year later to permit the incorporation of the second road, not the traditional Suez Canal route, which is shown there at the bottom of the slide, but the Arctic Sea route through, as the Arctic ice melts, it will become possible to send ships much more easily through the Arctic, and that could shave up to 2 weeks off the time it takes to go from China to Rotterdam. The land belt consists of 6 economic corridors shown here, and the southern route, the Suez Canal route, is one of the 2 maritime roads. So paradoxically, the roads are maritime and the belt is land. China's invested in more than 60 countries, and the investment is estimated about or in excess of the equivalent of $1 trillion. As Palto said, it was the subject of this book, which we published in July last year, I and Palto were two of the editors, and the other editor is Deeprai Mukherjee, who will be speaking to you at 2 o'clock. When the book came out, of course, and when we put it together, COVID had only really just become an issue, and we therefore didn't say much about the effect that might have on the Belt and Road Initiative. So that asks the question, has COVID-19 essentially suppressed it? There were plans before the Belt and Road Initiative, and one was a plan for the economic corridor between Pakistan and China, CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which actually predated the Belt and Road Initiative. That was then incorporated in the Belt and Road Initiative in April 2015. And the Chinese investment in Pakistan, and I'll explain why this is particularly important, has been enormous. Projected costs moved up to $62 billion US, and Pakistani officials have since mentioned even higher numbers. The maritime element, I won't talk about the northern corridor across the pole because there isn't time, but it follows the old Suez Canal route from China round through the South China Sea. And of course, this is of incredible strategic importance and concern because China, as you probably know, claims the so-called 9-dash line. It essentially claims most of the South China Sea, and its claims compete with claims by other states. So much so that the Chinese started in about 2014 building artificial islands, which the Washington Post quickly dubbed the Great Wall of Sand. And these are fortified bases with harbors, helicopter pads, and so on. So that's of great strategic concern. The road then passes through the Straits of Malacca. And again, that's of concern because the Straits of Malacca were one of the foci of piracy, although that has been brought under control, in partly because the Americans threatened to intervene, and therefore the littoral states didn't want the Americans in their backyard, so they got together and sorted the problem themselves. And it goes on to Calcutta and links up with the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar economic corridor, which is one of the branches of the land belt. It then goes part to Sri Lanka, where there's been huge Chinese investment, and then up to the port of Gwadar in Pakistan, just virtually on the Pakistan-Iran border, where it links up with the China-Pakistan economic corridor. It then goes down to Mombasa in Kenya, and there's been huge Chinese investment in Africa as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and then up through the Bab el Mandeb to Djibouti, where China has established its first overseas military base. So that is very significant. It then goes up through the Red Sea to the Suez Canal and on to Piraeus in Greece, where China now holds a 51% share. So China has poured huge investment into Piraeus. It then goes on to Venice and links up with the economic corridors which go into Europe. So it's a very coordinated plan. There are, as I say, problems with this route. The first one is the Bangladesh, China, India maritime Myanmar economic corridor, which goes through Myanmar, where there is considerable insurrection against the Myanmar government, whatever you think of it. And so there's a problem there. That is one of the reasons, of course, why the Rohingya population in Myanmar has been fleeing in large numbers into Bangladesh. And the China-Pakistan economic corridor, there are also some problems because there have been attacks on Chinese engineers working on infrastructure projects there. Now, of the various elements of the belt, the Chatham House, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, assessed that the China-Pakistan economic corridor, consisting of bridges, railways, energy installations, a redeveloped highway, and expansion of the Pakistani port of Gwadar, is considered the leading part of the belt element. There's a website you can see there about the CPEC. So it's a very high prestige and prominent initiative. Here is a map and the sources there. You can see that it goes from Kashgar in Pakistan down to Punjab on the Pakistan border, and then through Pakistan as far as Gwadar, almost on the border with Iran. It starts there, goes down to there with an oil pipeline, and then to Punjab on the Pakistan border. And then into Pakistan. You can see from this I think very useful map that the various elements of it. And when assessing what damage COVID-19 is going to do to the initiative, you can see, of course, that the items in solid are already completed. So that bit of capital investment is already completed. You will also notice from the key on the top left that a number of the power plants are actually fossil fueled. And in the recent COP26 conference, China did say that it would cut back on investing in fossil fuel plants, certainly abroad, if not in China itself. Here we go further south to Karachi, and again you can see more plants, some under construction. There's a nuclear power plant under construction, and there's a fossil fuel plant which is already completed. And then on to Gwadar, where it links with the Maritime Silk Road. A good example of the sort of thing that China's been investing in is the state-of-the-art Vocational and Technical Training Institute in the port city of Gwadar. It's not a particularly big project in terms of its value, its cost, but it's very, very significant because it's designed to shape and enhance the skills of the active population of Gwadar to participate in the growth of the port city. Developments at Gwadar rather mirrored developments at Djibouti. Notably, this Chinese high security compound at Gwadar with, as you can see, berms, security fences, pillboxes, guard towers, and so on. It's essentially a fortress, similar in style to the fortress at Djibouti. And it's not as silly as it seems, because there have been attacks on Chinese nationals who have been participating in developments under the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, whether these are specifically aimed at the Belt and Road Initiative or whether they're collateral damage from an existing dispute in south and western province of Balochistan, I couldn't really say, but it's a bit of a coincidence. And there was another attack in July this year in the northeast of the country, where again, at least 13 people were killed, including 9 Chinese engineers. So those are some of the problems with the initiative. And then we had COVID. The Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House, recently observed there were plans for pipelines and a port in Pakistan, bridges in Bangladesh, and railways to Russia, all with the aim of creating what China calls a modern Silk Road trading route to start a new era of globalization. The COVID-19 pandemic has significantly impacted globalization, and it significantly impacted China's ability and willingness to continue to pour financial resources into high-risk infrastructure projects. Chatham House's work assesses China's foreign economic engagement and it analyzes how these initiatives will be impacted by greater geopolitical competition and economic recovery post-COVID-19. And that's the website there, if you want to follow that up. As I say, I don't think the pandemic will end the process of globalization, but it's certainly given it a bad knock in the short term. Critics of BRI also accused China of pursuing a policy of debt trap diplomacy, luring developing countries into taking out loans to pursue infrastructure projects so that, in extremis, when those countries default, it can seize those assets to extend its diplomatic and military reach. Evidence to support that view, in Chatham House's view, however, is limited. Of all the countries along the belt, Myanmar, which has been in the news the last couple of days, has probably been the strongest to try to avoid falling into that debt trap. Well, the past 2 years have certainly not been kind to the Belt and Road Initiative. First of all, the United States labeled it a debt trap, a loan shock scheme for luring poor countries into economic vassalage, and began to pressure its allies and partners to stay away. Then came COVID-19. Last summer, that's summer just gone, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs admitted that as much as 60% of Belt and Road projects have been impacted to some degree. And that figure is surely higher. I apologize, that was the summer of 2020. And by January 2021, the figure is surely higher. New Chinese overseas lending has fallen precipitously as low-income countries face a debt crunch. Chinese lenders could take enormous losses. However, another article in Foreign Policy says that the Belt and Road Initiative hasn't died of COVID-19. On the contrary, President Xi and other Chinese officials continue to trumpet the initiative. In 2021, China will start to wind down its new investment into traditional capital-intensive infrastructure, essentially pouring concrete, both at home and abroad. In that way, the pandemic provides an excuse to cut losses on unviable projects. Instead, the initiative will refocus on public health, green technology, and digital services. This fresh-faced Belt and Road, higher tech, and more geared toward trade than investment, will fit neatly into China's new dual circulation economic concept, which emphasizes Chinese domestic consumption. It will also be more attractive to partner countries than its previous incarnation. There are three, and Foreign Policy, the journal, again, the references on here, has three priorities. The first is a health Silk Road. The COVID-19 vaccine race is Beijing's top priority. China wants to be seen as a responsible high-tech superpower that will help the world conquer the pandemic and not as a shady authoritarian regime that unleashed it. I was outside also Sainsbury's, the British supermarket, yesterday, and I was offered two of these, which are COVID-19 do-it-yourself test kits, which, funny old thing, are made in China. So the Chinese, I think, have been very astute on that one. Then there's the Green Silk Road. It's another way that, and facilitated perhaps by COVID, is another way that China can burnish its international image while peddling its high-tech products abroad. China's recent pledge to become carbon neutral by 2060 doubles as an industrial policy. It plans to deepen its dominance in fast-growing overseas market for wind turbines, photovoltaics, electric vehicles, lithium-ion batteries, and smart grid technologies. In 2019, over 70% of solar photovoltaics manufactured worldwide were made in China. China also controls up to 3/4 of global manufacturing capacity for lithium-ion battery cells. These are some of the world's fastest growing manufacturing industries. And then there's a renewed push for the digital Silk Road, launched in 2026, which will support the international expansion of Chinese companies under close supervision by the Communist Party. China now accounts for 23% of global cross-border data flows, mostly thanks to the use of Chinese apps and services in Japan and Southeast Asia. This is almost double the US share. Another more optimistic assessment from the Belt and Road point of view is from a survey by central banks this year, which found that although the COVID-19 crisis has affected many BRI projects, with more than 2/3 of central banks saying it has had a negative impact on progress to some degree, the primary reason for this was related to social distancing and lockdown measures limiting work. But when combined, a shift in government priority away from the BRI and local funding constraints had an even greater impact. China is now one of the world's largest creditors and has invested more than $500 billion in BRI-related projects, often lending to developing countries, particularly in Latin America and Africa. Any failure to repay these debts would, of course, impact severely on China. But China has now resumed much of its pre-crisis growth, and that this will be on the presentation which you will have, so I won't need to go through this. But central banks are very optimistic that BRI projects will contribute to post-COVID recovery. Furthermore, it's refocused attention away from pouring concrete onto trade, and more of that in a moment. Chatham House assessed that prolonged lockdown has slowed BRI projects to a snail's pace, and it will affect maritime Silk Road activities both in the short and the long term. In the mid to long term, BRI projects, it assesses, will pick up again. And this article in Foreign Policy opines that most of China's trading partners find this new Belt and Road compelling. It's a formula for rapid post-pandemic economic normalization. In a way, it's a bit like the Marshall Plan, which was used to redevelop Western Europe after the Second World War. And they are already benefiting. From a Chinese perspective, and I think this is a very good sentence, this higher tech Belt and Road, more focused on trade than on investment, is more sustainable than the chaotic, high risk, debt dependent model that preceded it. So, assessments of the effect of COVID-19 on Belt and Road vary. On the extreme left, there will be people, no doubt, who will say that COVID-19 has dealt BRI a fatal blow. The Diplomat, again, a very respectable journal dealing with Southeast Asia, the COVID-19 will cause major problems with BRI, and many big BRI projects will be abandoned. Central banking and Chatham House seem to think that COVID-19 will cause BRI, or has caused BRI, investment to slow to a snail's pace, but it will bounce back in time. And the journal Foreign Policy, and also Xinhua Net, the Chinese news net, believe that BRI will come out of COVID-19 stronger and better and focus more on trade than investment in a form which will be, being less debt dependent, will be more acceptable to the rest of the world. So the Draken is sick. It has been badly affected by BRI, but it may recover even stronger and more acceptable to the rest of the world. Thank you very much.